Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Ferrari have finally won something that's F1 adjacent we'll dive into, but George Russell has also revealed when the next big batch of Mercedes upgrades can be expected. Now they understand this car better, they know that it's a good platform to build off. When are they going to bring their next round of upgrades? He reckons Silverstone is when they're targeting and when they're very excited about what they have to come. Very much enjoyed to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. The 24-hour of Le Mans finished just a couple of hours ago, and it was the Ferrari AF Corsa team, can you believe it, that actually won. They hadn't even entered this competition, Ferrari, in about 50 years. They entered and won the hypercar category, and it's really cool to see. Riccardo, who I believe raced in Formula 3 back in the day, of course Pierre Greedy, who did a phenomenal job, and then Antonio Giovinazzi, obviously very well known from the Formula 1 days that he had, and just looking at the likes of some of the former, let's just say, Alfa Romeo drivers, Sauber drivers, the likes of Giovinazzi, the likes of Ericsson, right, because he's gone on to win the Indy 500 last year. Giovinazzi's now won Le Mans. Now I guess it's on also former Sauber driver Charles Leclerc to win the Monaco Grand Prix to complete the triple crown between those three drivers. But this is awesome for Giovinazzi, really, just because of like what he did in Formula 1. Really wanted to win stuff for Ferrari, never really happens, and gets this chance with Ferrari entering into hypercars and gets the job done. This NASCAR as well. So there's like a category for innovation, really. There's like a separate category, and there was one NASCAR Chevy Camaro that entered. This was driven by Jimmy Johnson, I believe Micah Rockenfeller, and also, of course, Jenson Button, 2009 F1 World Champion. And, man, that car sounded fantastic. The V8 engine on it, right? I'm sure those in attendance appreciated that. So, yeah, the number 51 Ferrari, though, wins the day. Leclerc was there the entire time. I think he did an all-nighter looking at what he looked like in the morning. I would love to drive a Ferrari here. It would be an incredible experience. Once in my life, I want to tick that box. So, incredible to have a Ferrari win here. And it's awesome to see for that side of the motorsport, because it was a very entertaining race. 24 hours, I mean, it could have gone either way. The Porsches were in the conversation, the Cadillacs were there, even the Peugeots weren't too far behind. And these are all the former Formula 1 names associated. So Giovinazzi, of course, Buemi and Hartley were in the seconds in the Toyota. Kobayashi's Toyota, unfortunately, he got hit in the rear like a night in one of the slow zones, and for some reason his car just broke effectively, so that was unfortunate for the other Toyota. But plenty other names, Jack Aitken, of course, that managed to bid it on the very first lap of Le Mans this year, which was unfortunate. And then in the other categories, Kubica, Fittipaldi, and of course Jenson Button on Garage 56. So pretty cool stuff, to be honest. There's only two Le Mans winners that are actually currently competing on the F1 grid. Those are, of course, Nico Hülkenberg and Fernando Alonso, who's won it a couple of times. Would be nice to see more crossover there, but especially with the current Formula 1 calendar, it's just not really going to happen. I know that Scott Dixon was racing as well, I think, for the Cadillac team, and he's obviously an IndyCar, six-time IndyCar champion and current IndyCar driver, but it's not really possible for some of the F1 drivers, nor does some of them want to do it. But it was certainly a nice crossover over the last couple of days, and it does make me wonder, with Ferrari coming back in, whether other manufacturers that are in F1 will look at something similar, because I think that Alpine and BMW might be coming into and also Lamborghini, right? I think Grosjean is going to be racing at the 24-hour Le Mans for Lamborghini next year in the hypercar category, so maybe Mercedes get tempted, maybe Aston Martin get tempted with their new hypercar, so who knows, but it's going to be interesting to keep up with and to follow. Speaking of Mercedes, though, this is the Mercedes W14 Evo, as some people have been determining it, the new sidepod version of the Mercedes that had a pretty good result in Monaco, P4 and fastest at the Hamilton that race. Could well have been P3, had more pace than Ocon, but it's Monaco, so it is what it is. And then obviously P2 and P3 for Russell and Hamilton at the Spanish Grand Prix. So a good debut for the Mercedes Evo that some people are referring to it as. But when's the next iteration going to be? They were roughly 0.3 of a second off Red Bull in race pace, which is pretty impressive. Obviously, there's a debate as to whether Red Bull weren't pushing, whether Verstappen had more pace in the tank, which I'm sure he did have. But still, that's a reasonable margin for them to work with going forward. But how are they going to try and close the rest of that gap? They're maybe at 0.3 on a circuit that suits them and track conditions that suit them. Maybe they're at 5/6 still on a circuit that doesn't suit them. How are they going to close that gap? When are the next upgrades going to arrive? Because it's not like Red Bull are going to stand still. So Mercedes have talked about this over the last couple of weeks, and there's been some insights actually, I believe it was after Monaco, from James Allison, who said they're going to bring a couple more things to Barcelona and then many more things in the races that follow. So the idea is that they didn't say at the time they're going to have like a major upgrade package plan for X or Y race, but it's going to be additional things effectively every single Grand Prix to upgrade the car. And that's their plan, to make sure they can keep up with the development the other cars are doing. They full well know that this concept now is performing as expected. They can build on it as initially planned. And yes, they might be 18 months behind where Red Bull are, which is obviously far from optimal, but at least they're in a more confident position now than they have been previously. Competing with Red Bull for either of the championships is not going to happen. Their intention will, I'm sure, be to win at least a couple of races by the end of the season, but in the immediate term, they've got to try and consolidate second place ahead of Aston Martin and Ferrari, and those teams are also bringing changes. Aston Martin are very confident in their upgrades they're bringing to Canada. Alonso says, they will crush the competition in Canada, and then in Silverstone too, they've got more things in the pipeline. So it's the Silverstone Grand Prix every year where a lot of teams, largely because either they're based in Silverstone or very close to it in the UK, teams bring upgrades to that track. Same with Imola, really. The start of the European split of the season, that's when the teams bring upgrades. It was meant to be Imola. A lot of teams brought upgrades in Monaco because they couldn't debut them there. Lando Norris also said as well that it's potentially Canada and then Silverstone where the big upgrades for McLaren are going to arrive, and it's a similar story with Alpine with big upgrades in Canada and then Silverstone. But we don't believe there's anything mega for Mercedes in Canada. Maybe a few small things, but we haven't heard anything quite to that effect. So it does make you wonder, when are Mercedes introducing the next step of their plan to get back to Red Bull and for sure consolidate second place? That will be their aim for the season. They've got the drivers to do it. They probably have the car to do it. George Russell says Silverstone is when they're very excited for and when they're really targeting, anticipating more developments there. So for the next couple of races, they're not expecting anything spectacular to change in terms of their car performance. But of course, the more they understand the car, the more performance they can extract. This was a discussion around about the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Red Bull brought an upgrade there that was apparently worth 0.3 of a second, but they only unlocked 1/10 that weekend because they hadn't fully figured out like how to set up that new upgrade package, how to make sure that that new version of the car is in the optimal window, whereas when they went to Miami the next race, they then actually got it dialed in. So possibly as they go forward with this upgrade, they'll find better and better ways to get the most out of their current package, but of course they're going to look to bring further upgrades going forward. And as Russell says, Silverstone they're excited for. Of course, not just because they're kind of a British team, they've got British drivers, and that's where the local fans will be hoping for some sort of miracle to take down Red Bull. And as he says, I think we'll be in a good place there to fight for a good result. I believe even James Vowles said, who's now at Williams at the start of the season, that even the former W14 package will be good at circuits like Silverstone and probably Spain as well. And they were good at Spain, and you'd expect them to be good at Silverstone as well. They were last year, even the W13. Hamilton could have even potentially won there if circumstances went slightly differently on that Sunday. So he urges caution, not to get carried away with the result, but Silverstone they are excited for. And in fairness, you look back to a season like 2021 where the Mercedes was clearly the second best car in the first few races of the season. They went to Silverstone. Hamilton had the controversial victory there, of course, with the Verstappen collision, but it was that weekend with the upgrade package they brought that really put Mercedes in a solid position to fight for the championships towards the end of the season. So it's always been Mercedes upgrades generally work quite well compared to their competitors, and Silverstone is where they're really targeting. So it's quite a while out still. I mean, look, we're at round 9 as of Spain. Technically only the 7th race of the season though, because no China and no Imola. So Canada is next up, and then a couple of weeks after that it's Austria, and then the Silverstone Grand Prix on the 7th through to the 9th of July. So that seemingly is where Mercedes are targeting their next big change, and then they will have an additional 12 or so races from then to the end of the year to see what that can do. There'll be further upgrades. Last year they brought upgrades in Austin, of course, right towards the end of the season. So they will continue to do stuff, but it's really this Grand Prix where they're targeting to consolidate. But other teams around them aren't going to sit still either, right? We know that Red Bull are planning things in the pipeline as well. And also Mercedes did admit that what Christian Horner said the other day about the fact that, this W14B, Evo, whatever, has cost them a lot of money. They says, yeah, creating the new front suspension was not cheap to make, was not cheap to fit on the car. But the benefit they have is that they started that development a long time ago now, pretty much even before the season began. They had these substantial changes in the work. So at least they haven't probably eaten up as much of the budget as they would have done if they got to, let's say, Baku and then decided, all right, this isn't working, we've got to change. They'd have already eaten up quite a lot, like going down the wrong direction at that point. So Mercedes admit that it's not ideal the way things have gone, but it's probably better than it could have been, and it's probably better than what Ferrari are presently doing. Before we close out then, just wanted to mention this because there are, 7 drivers with contracts expiring at the end of this season. Hamilton is one of them. We believe that he's going to re-sign a deal in probably the coming weeks. We heard that after the Spanish Grand Prix on the Monday, which is just under a week ago today, they were apparently going to have a conversation with Toto Wolff and get that sorted out. No announcement yet. Nico Hülkenberg, Kevin Magnussen, Zhou Guanyu, Yuki Tsunoda, Nick de Vries and Logan Sargent. What changes are we going to see next year? Hülkenberg to me is definitely performing at a level that deserves to stay around. Magnussen has been actually quite poor, I think, relative to him so far this season. Zhou, I think, has done a phenomenal job. I think he deserves a seat still in Formula 1, and I'd love to see that happen. Whether it is going to happen, given the fact that eventually Sauber is going to become Audi Sauber, and they're going to want German drivers. They apparently want Sebastian Vettel back. They might want Alonso. They, probably want Mick Schumacher as well. So it might be tough for Zhou, but he probably had his best race of his career last time out in Spain. Yuki's been phenomenal. Nick de Vries, I don't think lasts another season. Maybe even won't even last this season. Logan Sargent might get extended, but we know that Toto Wolff probably wants to put Mick Schumacher in that car if he can, given the Mercedes-Williams relations. But very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.